August 1945. The sun hangs low over the shattered landscape of Okinawa, its light filtering through the haze of dust that still lingers from weeks of unrelenting bombardment. A narrow dirt path winds between the blackened remnants of sugarcane fields and the skeletal frames of burned-out villages. The air carries the faint, acrid scent of cordite, mingled with the sweeter note of overripe fruit left to rot on the ground. Along this path, a column of United States Marines advances slowly, their boots raising small clouds of red earth. Their olive-drab uniforms are stained with sweat and grime, their faces etched with the exhaustion of 90 days of savage combat. Yet their rifles are slung, their posture relaxed. Ahead, in the shadow of a half-collapsed stone wall, a small group of Japanese women and children crouches silently, watching the approaching foreigners with wide, wary eyes. In the final weeks of the Battle of Okinawa, as organized resistance collapsed and the island fell fully into American hands, moments such as this began to unfold across the countryside. What had been the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War, a struggle that claimed over 200,000 lives, now gave way to an uneasy stillness. For the Japanese civilians who had survived the firestorms, the typhoon of steel, and the deliberate destruction of their homes, the arrival of the occupiers was expected to bring only further suffering. Propaganda had painted the American Marines as demons who would rape, murder, and enslave. Mothers had been told to kill their children and themselves rather than fall into enemy hands. Many had done so. Those who remained waited in numb dread for the fulfillment of those terrible promises. Yet what they encountered instead was something their minds struggled to comprehend. As the Marines halted near the wall, one among them, a young corporal from Kansas whose helmet bore the faded stencil of the 1st Marine Division, noticed the hollow cheeks of the children. Without a word, he unslung his pack, opened a K-ration tin, and poured its contents, cooked rice mixed with bits of Spam and carrot, into the nearest empty bowl held tentatively by a trembling woman. Another Marine followed, then another. Soon a quiet line formed, not of conquerors demanding tribute, but of weary men sharing what little they carried. The women, conditioned by years of imperial discipline and wartime scarcity, dropped instinctively to their knees in gratitude, heads bowed low, unable to meet the eyes of those who fed them without condition or payment. This simple act of filling rice bowls without asking stood in stark contrast to everything the Japanese people had been taught to expect. For years, the military government had insisted that surrender meant annihilation, that Americans were barbaric materialists devoid of honor. Civilians had watched their own soldiers requisition the last grains of rice, had seen neighbors beaten for hoarding a handful of sweet potatoes. Hunger had become the constant companion of every household. By 1945, the average daily calorie intake on the home islands had fallen below 1,000, and on Okinawa it was far worse. Children grew thin and listless. Mothers rationed each grain as though it were gold. The imperial ideology demanded sacrifice without complaint, endurance without hope of relief. To accept charity was unthinkable. To receive it from an enemy was unimaginable. But the Marines gave freely. Their own rations, though monotonous, were plentiful by Japanese standards. A single K ration box contained more calories than many Okinawan families had seen in days. C-ration cans of meat and vegetable stew, tins of peanut butter, packets of powdered eggs, all were distributed without hesitation. More astonishing still were the quantities arriving daily by ship and aircraft. American logistical records from the Recounts campaign show that by September 1945, over 12,000 tons of food were being unloaded monthly for both military and civilian relief. Rice, wheat, canned goods, powdered milk poured ashore in a volume that dwarfed anything the Imperial Japanese Army had ever managed, even in peacetime. To the women kneeling in the dust, this abundance appeared almost supernatural. Historical accounts preserved in the official histories of the 10th Army and in the diaries of individual Marines record scene after scene of this quiet generosity. On the Motobu Peninsula, elements of the 6th Marine Division distributed 400 pounds of captured Japanese rice to refugees within hours of securing the area. Near Naha, medical corpsmen treated starving children while cooks from the 22nd Marines prepared vats of stew that fed hundreds. One Marine, Private First Class Eugene Sledge, later wrote in his memoir With the Old Breed of the profound silence that fell over groups of civilians when offered food. They accepted it with a dignity and gratitude that was deeply moving. Another, correspondent Ernie Pyle, before his death on nearby Ishima, noted the astonishment in the eyes of Okinawans who had expected bayonets and received chocolate bars instead. The recurring symbol throughout these encounters was rice itself, the sacred staple of Japanese life, the very embodiment of sustenance and civilization. In Japan, rice had always carried spiritual weight. Its cultivation defined the seasons, its harvest the rhythm of existence. During the war, rice became the measure of survival. Empty rice bowls signified defeat and shame. Yet now, in the hands of American Marines, those same bowls were filled again and again without demand or degradation. Each scoop of white grains, each portion of canned hash spooned over rice spoke not merely of calories but of a different philosophy. Where imperial authority had taken, democratic abundance gave. Where fascist hierarchy had starved the weak to strengthen the state, American practice fed the weakest first. The rice bowl, once a vessel of scarcity and control, became a quiet testament to a system that produced surplus and chose to share it. This experience profoundly altered perceptions on both sides. For the Japanese mothers who knelt, the act of receiving food from the enemy without violence or humiliation cracked the foundation of everything they had been taught to believe. Propaganda that had portrayed Americans as monsters now collided with the evidence of their own senses. Some began, hesitantly, to question the divine destiny of the emperor, the inevitability of Bushido, the necessity of endless sacrifice. Others simply absorbed the lesson that survival might be possible under occupation, that life could continue beyond surrender. Over time, these small moments accumulated into a broader realization. Defeat need not mean extinction, and foreign rule need not mean slavery. For the Marines, the encounters were equally transformative. Many had landed on Okinawa expecting a population as fanatically hostile as the soldiers they fought. Instead, they met women and children whose gratitude was palpable and whose suffering was undeniable. The act of sharing rations humanized both giver and receiver. It softened the edge of victory, tempered triumph with responsibility. In letters home and in post-war recollections, veterans frequently returned to these scenes, the bowed heads, the careful hands accepting food, the silence broken only by the sound of spoons against tin. The rice bowl became their symbol too, a reminder that power could be exercised not only through destruction, but through restoration. In the years that followed, as Japan rebuilt under American occupation, the memory of those filled rice bowls lingered. General MacArthur's administration distributed millions of tons of food aid, averting the mass starvation many had feared. The sight of American trucks unloading sacks of wheat and rice in Tokyo neighborhoods echoed those first tentative offerings on Okinawa. The democratic constitution that emerged in 1947, the land reforms that followed, the economic miracle that eventually lifted Japan to prosperity, all traced their distant roots to the trust tentatively established in those moments of shared sustenance. And so, in the quiet gesture of filling an empty bowl without asking, something larger than charity occurred. A bridge was built across the abyss of total war, spanning ideologies that had seemed irreconcilable. The rice bowl, simple and ancient, carried within it the possibility of renewal. It whispered that abundance need not be hoarded, that strength could be measured in generosity, that freedom might begin with the decision to feed rather than to conquer. In the dust of Okinawa, beneath a lowering sun, mothers knelt not in final submission, but in the first fragile recognition of a different world taking shape, one bowl at a time, one life spared, one future quietly redeemed.